Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Denodo in the Solution Spotlight, a unique online event for industry professionals.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solution Spotlight featuring Denodo, and focused on best practices for unlocking the full potential of your data lakes. The adoption of data lakes and data lake houses is on the rise, driven by the increasing need for organizations to harness the full potential of their data. However, as these modern data platforms gain traction, it's essential for businesses to consider their integration with the existing environment, building a strategy that ensures the coexistence of these platforms while effectively addressing business needs in terms of efficiency and cost effectiveness has never been more important. By carefully planning how data lakes and data lake houses will complement the existing infrastructure, organizations can unlock a powerful data ecosystem that supports current operations and paves the way for future innovation and growth. To explore this topic, I want to bring in an expert on the subject. Paul Moxon is the Senior Vice President for Data Architecture and Chief Evangelist at Denodo. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Doug. Happy to be here.
Well, I've been looking forward to talking to you because I think this is a really relevant conversation to be having, particularly at the first of the year. And I wanted to dive right into it. With regard to supporting current operations and future needs of the business, what is it that people should be considering with regard to their strategy around data lakes and data lake houses? Let's start right from the top.
Okay, so the thing that people need to think about, they need to remember when they're thinking about data lakes and data lake houses, is the goal here is to drive value for the business. It's to provide insights from all of that data within the organization to drive better decision-making, informed decision-making, with better outcomes. And really building a data lake is really just a stepping stone towards the end goal. It's not the end goal in itself. And many people think of the data lake as the data strategy. And they get so wrapped up in this idea of the data lake and the value it can bring, and it can bring a lot of value, that they forget about the other aspects of the strategy, such as data democratization, making it easier for users to find and understand and access the data that they need to drive these insights, or ensuring that the data and the insights are delivered at the speed that the business needs them. So if your users have to wait for a few days or even a couple of weeks to get the data to be loaded into the data lake before they can get the insights, it might be too long. And finally, you need to ensure that you have all the proper controls in place from a security and data privacy perspective, from a governance perspective, even from a regulatory compliance perspective. So all of these factors are in addition to the data lake and the data lake house, and they need to be things that people think about really ideally before you build the data lake, because they support and enhance that data lake. They're not things that you bolt on later. So you need to think about all of this as part of that data lake element of the strategy.
Yeah, so obviously everybody has their own unique situation, and there's lots of existing infrastructure in these organizations. I'm curious, with regard to challenges that you were just touching on, what trends are you seeing that are facing these organizations as they start to develop that data lake strategy within these existing complex infrastructures?
Yeah. So the first part of that is that organizations, the people building or defining the data strategy need to recognize that their data is distributed. It's in databases, it's in applications, it's in existing data warehouses. It may even be in existing data lakes, actually. And then you also have data in Excel files on SharePoint and things like that. So if you sort of understand and acknowledge that your data is distributed and not all of it is going to be into the data lake, that's the first part. You have to understand that. If you are determined to put everything in your data lake, all my data is going to go into my data lake and everybody will be able to use the data lake for their analytics, you're going to burn and fail quite badly, I'm afraid. The concept of a single repository is a good concept, but it's not the reality for most organizations. It's just too difficult technically. There may be legal implications, organizational barriers to getting everything in that single place. And we often find that people already have data lakes. They may not be aware of them. So when they start building their data lake strategy, they've already built, somebody in a business unit or a region somewhere else has already got a data lake. A great example of this is we've got a very large UK government agency that actually had 12 data lakes. They had one for personal taxes, corporate taxes, special taxes, all these sorts of things. And they decided they wanted to put it all together. And somebody just said, this is crazy. We built the data lakes to consolidate data. Now we're going to do another layer to further consolidate the data. And this is where the concept of logical data architectures comes in, where with a logical data architecture, you have a data access layer that sits on top of your physical data repositories and provides a single place for users to come and get the data they need. And this is the ultimate goal, getting the data to the users. So this data access layer decouples the physical data stores from the users. They don't connect directly to the data lake or directly to the SaaS CRM application like Salesforce, etc. And it means that they can go to one place to get their data, and it hides all the complexity of that physical infrastructure, which is very complex in large organizations, trying to find out where your data is stored, etc. So we decouple the physical data model from the business view of the data, how we access and use the data. So as a user, I shouldn't really care about whether the data is stored in a Parquet file in the data lake, or it's in a data lake file, or Iceberg, or there's even a Apache Hoodoo format. And people are arguing about which is the best format, which is most performant, which matches most use cases. As an end user, as a business person, I don't care, and I shouldn't care. All of that is irrelevant to me. As long as I can find and access the data, trusted data that I have confidence in, then all's good to me. So there's the danger, the biggest danger is that concept of everything's going to be in the data lake, pushing everything into the data lake instead of recognizing I have all this existing investment. I could better leverage that than try to force fit everything into the data lake.
You're getting towards something that has been a very large theme throughout the last couple of years that we've been covering, and that is this idea of data democratization and really this self-service enablement, where the business user is provided with incredible tools now to be able to leverage all of this data in almost a non-technical way, if you will, so that they can really dig into those business insights. I'm curious what you think an organization should be looking for with regard to trying to get to that level of self-service actualization for the end user.
Yeah, I mean, I think of self-service in two ways, two perspectives, if you like. First of all, how can I find the data and understand the data that I need? And secondly, how do I trust that data? Is there some way that I can feel confident I'm using the right data? I'm not using dirty data, somebody's cast off, or something that somebody's cobbled together. And what we're actually finding is organizations are building internal data marketplaces. Now, data marketplace is an overused term at the moment. We have Snowflake with its data marketplace where you can go and buy data sets. This is an internal data marketplace so that people can go to this data marketplace to find the data that they need and also be able to trust the data. So they're looking at, in some ways, people think of it as almost like this is, just like you have Amazon makes it easy for you to go shopping online. Data marketplaces make it easy for people to find data within the organization. So it's things like recommendations based on your past usage or your peer usage. If your colleagues are using a certain data set and you're using a very different one, maybe that's for a purpose, or maybe you just don't realize that there's a better data set. Shortcuts to popular data sets, so I don't have to go and search and find them. There's a link there in my dashboard which will take me there straight away. Making it easy to load the data into analytical tools like Tableau or Power BI. And then also from the trust aspect, the trust factors, things like can we have users collaborating and giving feedback on the data, sort of endorsements, so to speak. Data lineage. Where's the data coming from? Give me some data lineage so I can understand the data. Or a feedback loop so I can ask questions about the data and the meaning of the data, and maybe have a data owner. And wonderful thing, that would be wonderful for most organizations, just knowing who owns the data. So these are the types of things that we look for, and we see organizations building the data marketplace to support self-service, allow the users to easily find, understand, and access the data with the tools that they're familiar with the tools that they want to use, whether it's Excel, Power BI, or if it's some AI tool like Data IQ or something like that.
Yeah, so this is why it's such a pleasure to have someone as expert as yourself to help us keep people out of the weeds. So what I want to dig into is some of the mistakes that you've seen people make. I know you've seen a thing or two. I'm curious, where you see people, maybe going astray with regard to trying to implement a self-service approach.
The usual way that people start off thinking about self-service is, how do I feed the what I'll call the BI users, the BI and reporting use cases. So people will be using Tableau or Power BI or Click or something like that. And it's, how do I let them access the data? But there's more to SQL type access for a good self-service initiative. You have many different use cases, you have many different users, and you have to think beyond just SQL. API access. API access allows you to go and provide data to downstream applications. API access allows you to provide data to data scientists, machine learning algorithms, etc., especially those in production where you don't want to be reading from CSV files. So you need to think of the different users, the different use cases, the different interaction patterns that people will need, instead of just sticking with that SQL mentality. We've got one of our customers, it's an industrial real estate company, they call themselves. It's a company called Prologis, that use the Denodo platform to build this self-service type of access. And they actually say it's accelerating insights by 30%. The bigger thing is, we have this great comment from the VP of Enterprise Architectures there, who said, the ability for business users to answer the question that is on their mind is absolutely huge. They don't have to wait to get the data. They can just go into this self-service initiative and get the data that they need. But it does mean that you have to think beyond just SQL access. Think about other things. And we have these architectures like data mesh, which are driving this type of thinking. They're very API centric. So think beyond SQL. That's, I suppose, my biggest message.
Let's talk a little bit about speed, because obviously the amount of data is ever increasing, and I think we all agree that's an avalanche that isn't stopping anytime soon. So it does have implications with regard to speed of data delivery. I'm curious if there is anything specific to speed that you can offer in addition to what you mentioned a bit earlier.
Yeah, I mean, speed of query, and like you say, the volumes of data, etc. It is important, but you can have the fastest data lake in the world in terms of executing your queries. But if it takes you 2 weeks to load the data into the data lake, your users are still waiting 2 weeks to get their data. So you've got to think about the whole aspect of how long does it take to get the data into the hands of the users, not just the actual physical execution of the query, even though that is important as well. Don't get me wrong. You don't want to go and provide the users quick access to data, but then their query, which should take 5 minutes, takes 5 hours. They're not going to be happy. So first of all, using this logical approach based on data virtualization, you don't have to load everything into the data lake. So you can actually deliver the data to the users quicker because you're not building data pipelines, loading the data into something like Databricks, then having to transform and format it and cleanse it, etc., before the users can access the data. You're saying, no, you can go and access the data directly from the data source where it's appropriate. In some cases, we will load the data into the data lake because it's most appropriate. So you can speed up delivery of the data. And again, you have options. Obviously, when you've given people access to the data, whether it's in the data lake or whether it's directly accessing the data through the data access layer, this logical layer, you still need to be able to perform the queries in a reasonable fashion, in a reasonable time. And that's where, and this is a trend you'll see more and more, that the execution engines, the MPP, very powerful MPP execution engines that you get in the data lakes, the query engines like Presto, etc., are actually being embedded in other tools. And we've done the same with the Denodo platform. So, and Pablo will show this a bit later. So we can still run those massively parallel queries over huge data sets if you've got massive data sets in your data lake. But we can also deliver data quicker by not having to load it into the data lake itself. So it's two parts to that answer. Delivering data quicker, and then once you do have that data in your data lake, if that's where you've put it, being able to access it just as quickly as if you're using a data lake engine as well.
Yeah, it's the conundrum, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And ultimately, what we have now with tools like Denodo is incredible power to do all kinds of things, but the responsibility, on the other hand, is certainly around things like security, governance, cost controls. Can you talk a little bit about how Denodo approaches that other side of the coin with regard to not only the power and speed, but the responsible control of the data?
If you think of a logical architecture where you've got the logical data access layer, it's a very, very privileged position because it knows a lot of information about what data is being accessed from all of these different repositories, who's accessing it, etc., which makes it the perfect place to start to enforce your security and governance controls. Control who is accessing what data, how they're accessing the data. One place to enforce it, so it becomes an enforcement point. I think of large organizations, and we've got some customers, the largest banks in the world and things like that. They have thousands and thousands of databases. And if I have to go to every single database and every single tool and start enforcing security policies, governance policies, data masking policies, etc., somewhere along the line, somebody's going to mess up. Somebody's going to make a mistake. Now, if I can consolidate that and put it in one place in the data access layer, now I've got something that I can manage and control and ensure consistency in, say, masking PII data, PCI data. If I enforce it in one place, then it means that it's consistent instead of having to enforce it in hundreds or thousands of different places and getting it wrong. So it's a very, very privileged position that the Denodo platform has. And we've got some very advanced capabilities around security and governance controls, attribute-based access controls, etc., to ensure that you can comply with your governance and security policies. And often these governance and security policies are driven by regulations, data privacy regulations, etc., and you have to comply with them. Otherwise, you start to get very large fines. And in Europe, under GDPR, people even go to jail. So getting that right is essential. And the Denodo platform is a very, very good addition to getting that right.
Well, so I think we might That might be a great segue for us to maybe jump into a presentation of the Denodo platform.
Yep.
And I think you have a colleague you want to bring in to do that presentation, Pablo
Yeah,
Alvarez.
absolutely. I mean, I've talked a lot about the Denodo platform, and I've talked about the benefits of a logical approach to data architecture and data delivery. But if we move now to Pablo, he can actually show us how this works. So Pablo's demo, it's going to be in three parts, really reflecting different points of view of the usage of the platform. So we'll start off looking at this from a data engineer's perspective. How do you connect your data and how do you expose this data to users? Then we'll go and look at what we just talked about, Doug, the security and governance aspects of the platform, how the logical layer makes it easy for that common and consistent enforcement of security policies. And then finally, the last part of the demo, Pablo's going to look at it from a user perspective. How do they find and understand the data they need? How can they easily access it? So on.
And I just wanted to let everybody know that after Pablo's done and Paul comes back, I'll come back as well with some questions for both of them, and we'll get into a little Q&A session. So, yeah, Pablo, by all means, take it from here.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys, and yeah, ready for the demo here. Well, as Paul mentioned, I want to show you a little bit how this looks like in action. So it's not just a conversation; you actually see software. So I want to start, as Paul said, with a little bit of the technical side. We are talking about a data lake here and the extension of the data lake into the broader ecosystem. So let's start with that sort of technical hat of the data engineer. The application that you see here on the screen, top left, you can see the Denodo Design Studio. This is the application that a data engineer will use. And in fact, if you look at it, it's very similar to a database management tool with like the panel on the left and the tabs on the right that allow you to do that kind of work. In fact, what you see here is the definition of the embedded MPP, one of the components of the Denodo platform. This embedded MPP is powered by Presto. That is part of our distribution. And you can see here part of the configuration, in particular, where I'm connecting that MPP engine to the object storage. In this case, I'm in AWS. So I'm connecting that engine to 3 buckets that I have for testing here connected from this engine. So from here, like the first thing that you could do as a data engineer is probably go to this option here, create base view. And this is going to give you access to that object storage. In this case, as I mentioned, 3 buckets in S3. So you can browse through the different folders that you have. And within each folder, you might have other folders and whatnot until you find, in this case, the Parquet files that I want to use. So this is a very common scenario where you start browsing your object storage, your data lake storage, and connect the tables, in this case, Parquet files that you have in there, into your logical layer that Paul was referring to earlier. This works with Parquet files, as I have here, but also with Delta and Iceberg. So it's very easy to start working with files in those formats. You see here another option, MPP catalogs. If you already have a data lake catalog, for example, Glue, you can also plug it in and start working straight with that. So that's normally the first step, when you're working specifically with the data lake. And once you have that done, you see that I already have some tables here that come from that data lake. You can go to the shell and run your query, like this one here in this case, and in a few seconds it'll come back with the results, as you see here for this query that is getting some aggregates in terms of sales per country. And you can also go, if you want to understand the technical details of what's going on, into this screen here that will give you more details into what's happening. So you see here the breakdown of the execution trace that the MPP engine is actually producing. And you can click on each of the nodes and get all the details of what the data lake is doing, the different stages of the data lake pipeline and whatnot. And then actually, if you go at the top of this pipeline, these 4 nodes here that you see on gray, that's the logical layer where we actually can see the connection string or the query that has been pushed down to Presto in this particular case. So you get kind of a combination of like the abstraction layer that this logical platform provides, but you can also dig into the details of what the data lake is actually doing. And you can use this for loading data into the data lake, ingesting processes. You can do query acceleration. You can, of course, read existing content as I'm reading here. You can do the whole spectrum of data lake management. You can also create derived data models with a graphical wizard like you see here, where following these different tabs of the wizard, you can very easily, using the graphical wizard here, define derived data models, put them into different curation zones of the data lake, and use ELT style processing to actually persist that more massage data set using the data lake itself. So all of that is very easy, and you can use the abstraction that the logical layer provides here to control and manage your data lake. But as Paul mentioned earlier, your data ecosystem does not end with a data lake. It goes well beyond that. In many organizations, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of data sources. So the goal of our platform is actually give you access to all of that. And if you click on new data source, you can see that we offer connectivity options to pretty much anything out there, going from cloud databases, relational databases, and things like that. But also getting a little bit into things a little bit more exotic. You can connect to any endpoint that can be an API, Excel files, even things like SAP, Salesforce, and pretty much any component that has data in your ecosystem, you can connect that logical layer to and use that to access data in real time. And as I mentioned, ingest it in the data lake, use ELT and whatnot. So that's definitely also possible. And not only that, you can also use the engine here to run federated queries across data sources. So let me do a quick example here. This query is pretty much the same as before, but I'm actually joining this table in Oracle with the other tables in the data lake. So if you look at the execution plan, once I run the query again should come back in a few seconds. And the execution trace, however, is a little bit different. You can see here that from the beginning, I have two branches, and those are the two branches that the federation engine is triggering. This one here on the right-hand side, it's going to Oracle, and you can see the query that we sent to Oracle. And this one here on the left-hand side, you can see the embedded plan of the MPP engine that gets me the details of what Presto is actually doing, scanning and reading the Parquet files in the object storage. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of the flavor of the technical details of how this works, of the tools that the data engineer has. But as Paul mentioned, there is a lot more. So Paul, that's all from the technical side.
Great, thanks for that, Pablo. Now then, Doug and I also talked about, as part of our chat, we talked about security and governance. And I mentioned the privileged position that the Denodo platform plays in respect to this. So maybe you can show us how Denodo can enforce security and governance policies.
Definitely. Yeah, that's one of the critical pieces that our platform offers, because being this layer on top of all of your data sources, it's kind of like a single stop to apply security policies. So we have a couple of ways to manage security here in the Denodo platform. So if you go to administration, you can see the user and role management. So that's kind of the traditional way to set security. You can, for example, look at the business intelligence role and edit the privilege. So for each of the schemas here, you can add privilege to the views or tables, execute, write, read, write, etc. So that's kind of like the traditional approach, where you, similar to a relational database, but going across all of your data sets, you can set up security and privilege management. However, it's also possible to set up this access control using security policies, which is maybe a more modern approach to manage security. So you can see here the policy manager. I already have a policy here in place called mask sensitive, but let me create another one for you here. So you see here the wizard to create new policies. Let's call it, I don't know, restrict by location. And a policy, it's really defined by three pieces that you see here: audience, elements, and restriction. So the audience will be who this policy applies to, can be everybody, can be a specific role, or can be also an attribute. So you can use this to do role-based access control, but also attribute-based access control. The elements will define what pieces of which data sets this affect to, and the restrictions will tell Denodo what to do. For example, I can only show roles that fulfill condition, and then you can actually use tags. There's the concept of tags that you can apply to columns or to tables, and you can use those tags to, for example, say I want nation key equal France or something like that, to create a policy that when nation is present in your table will filter with that condition, so you will only see customers or sales or transactions from the country France. So something like this is quite straightforward to create and manage. As you can see, you can do other types of restrictions, like very often masking or encryptions, denying execution and whatnot, and very easily, based on that concept of tags and other semantics, to define a library of policies that manage the security in a very controlled and managed way. So that way you create sort of that global place, global layer where security is also enforced, not just access is centralized, but security is also enforced. And I'd like to add another piece here to this section. We were talking about managing security. Another critical piece is managing the auditing and the monitoring of what's going on. And for that, we have also a set of dashboards that we distribute that you can see here. This one is kind of like more focused on the overview of the system, what's available, what's going on in terms of activity. Well, there's a lot of different tabs and dashboards that we provide. One in particular I think is especially interesting, although I'm going a little bit past the security piece, which is this FinOps dashboard. Since we are that central single access point logical layer, we can do security, but we can also very well understand what's going on in terms of the global cost of your data traffic. We monitor every piece of information coming in and going out, and therefore you can look at this and say, hey, I have a lot of cost in AWS. Let me click on that. Where is that coming from? Well, there's a lot of usage of Presto, a lot of usage of Postgres. So let me click on that and see what's happening. And you can see here the traffic, the number of queries, the number of rows, metrics like that. And you can even go into this other tab and look into the details. It looks like there is a lot of work with TPCH. This is my machine, so this is a lot of the testings that I'm doing. But you can go here and even look at the queries. Let me go full screen for that and see all the queries that have been running on this system, the actual query itself, the user, the system, and the and metrics that are useful for understanding cost. So you can, for example, order by this and see who's issuing these queries, what's the query, and maybe you can give them a call and say, hey, you're spending too much money, or you can create a policy to restrict usage. You cannot run more than 10 queries per hour because things are getting out of hand, or things like that. There's a lot of power in harnessing how data access really works when you really understand across the board what's going on, and you have that kind of centralized sort of access proxy where you can set controls on what's going on. That's what I wanted to mention in this section, Paul.
Okay, that's great, Pablo. Thanks once again. The FinOps stuff is really, really exciting because I hear the horror stories of companies who have got budgets for their cloud data lake or their cloud data warehouse, and they cost it out, and then they go and find out that they're burning through their credits in 6 months instead of a year, and they've got to go back to the CFO and ask for another few $1 million, etc. and it gets really painful for them. So having something like this, which highlights where the costing is going, is great.
Definitely.
One other thing, I would say the final thing, but one other thing that Doug and I talked about was the end user perspective of this, of making it easy to find and access and understand the data that they need. Maybe you can show that part of it as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's critical from the perspective of, you were talking before about data democratization. So far, we've seen things that are quite techy. They're for the tech savvy side of the house. Both the dashboards, the security piece, the data engineering piece. If I'm an end user, that's not what I'm going to use. And it's very easy to think that end users, will go to Tableau and just look at a report or dashboard, like similar to what I have here on the screen right now. And that's true when things are already present and available. But more often than not, the complexity of working with data is not to read an existing report, is to go do something new that doesn't exist. Maybe there is a new marketing campaign and you need to pull together some information and create your own dashboard. And the current trends are to put that in the hands of the end users as much as possible. So you're not creating bottlenecks with constant requests for new dashboard, new reports, etc. That's kind of the idea behind self-service and data democratization. So for that, I want to introduce this tool, the Denodo Data Catalog, which is sort of sharing the same data space. It's definitely connected to that same logical layer. It shares the same metadata, but is really focused on those end users that want to understand what's available for them, what data they have, and how to work with it. So this is a portal where you have kind of access to what's the most popular, what's most commonly used by yourself, where you left off yesterday, and things like that. And also the search box. So let me start searching, for example, for customer, and play a little bit with that. So I get here the search results. Normally, you'll get kind of a bunch of hits for your search. You want to narrow it down. So you see here tags, categories. So maybe I want to focus on sales, and I want to get information that has been endorsed. So kind of bringing in some of the governance that we offer. So apply those filters. Now things are restricted here. I see this customer table that is labeled as gold, is in the sales category, has a good description, looks promising. I can click on that and I get to the details of that particular table. You can see the descriptions. You can see a bunch of different options available here. You can see how an end user will find this type of UI much more user-friendly, easier to navigate, and useful to kind of focus on those things like search, browsing, etc. that I mentioned. But I want to go a little beyond that. This is what most other catalogs do. I want to go a little beyond that. First, for example, I may have questions around this data, or maybe I don't have access to this data, or I see an issue here. You can manage those requests straight from here. Maybe I want to ask a question and say, hey, data for corporate. Hey, I'm planning to use this for a corporate report. Is this data approved? Something like that, with high priority. So you can do this kind of like back and forth between you and the data stewardship team directly on the tool. I'm also a data steward, so you can see here in the request management, I have all of the access to these options that I just mentioned. Let me actually go back now to where did my browser go? 1 second here. There you go. Let me go full screen here. All right, so you can manage all of that directly from here. There's a lot of interactivity and collaboration built into the catalog. But the most interesting part of this tool is that since it's connected to that logical data delivery layer that you can run queries on, you can actually run queries, and you can do it from here in a variety of ways. So first, there is this new integration with generative AI where you can input queries in natural language. So maybe I want to ask, do we have customers in France? As my initial input, and click on generate and see what's up in there. keep in mind, as an end user, I might not be very familiar with SQL. So how do I build SQL that gives me the answer to that question? Well, Gen AI is here to help. It builds the query, it shows you what it's built, and it gives you the explanation of what's created to see if that's what you're looking for. So it does look like we have customers in France. So I could start working from here. You see this option open in shell. So I can click on that. This is a standard shell. So if I am a power user, maybe I can start working with this instead of France. Maybe I actually meant Spain and I made a mistake. You can rewrite your query there and continue working. This offers autocomplete, so you can actually access the different fields that you have available in this table and whatnot, and get your data back here. So that's another option. As you can see, you can start typing your SQL and get data results immediately from here. But something that I really like is this data preparation option, because it allows you to go beyond that. Something that we see a lot in this type of users is that they just want to download data and start working on Excel. That means that now you have a copy of data that is out of control. You cannot break your governance. Who knows what that data in Excel is where it's gonna go. So the more capabilities you go to your end users to get data to what they like within a platform that is governed, the better your governance will be. So I think this data preparation tab here helps to really get there. For example, well, now I know that we have customers in France, we have customers in Spain. I want to actually work with the information we have there. So I want to get their names. I want to see if they are preferred or not. I want to get the country for sure. And maybe I want to get the email. I'm preparing an email campaign. So you can click on load data. You can see a sample of that information here. And you can start working with this data to really massage it into what you really need. So let me start with the country and get a filter where it's exactly let's click on here. So I get this gets a list of values from the table, and I'm going to stick to France. So I'm creating that filter. You see that the sample is now reduced. I have first name and last name. Maybe I want to concat these two guys. There's a concat option here. You can see the different graphical wizards. I want to concat first name with the other column, which is last name. And I want to put this into a new column called full name. You see here the full name now. So I can probably delete first name, last name, get to the shape that I need. I have the preferred customer flag. I don't like the format Y and N. So I can maybe go here and there is a replace function wizard somewhere over here. Replace. You see all the wizards are different, are tailored for the specific function, trying to be easy to use. So I want to replace the Y with the word yes. And another mapping, I want to replace the N with the word no. And sort of massage my data now. You can see the result is sort of looking much better. Maybe email can go into lowercase. I don't like that mix case that I have there. Change to lowercase. And there we go. So that's exactly the data I was looking for. Now, I can get the full result set, look at it here. I can maybe get the SQL statement and copy, paste this in a notebook or like another reporting tool or whatnot. I can save these queries, and I have here this section, my queries, where I can save my favorites. I can share those with others. I can export this, and maybe I do actually need to get this data in Excel at the end of the day, but at least all those operations, all that logic has been done in a more governed fashion. And finally, maybe I want to open in Tableau or in Power BI or in a reporting tool. We also offer access to any data set as REST of data and GraphQL. So maybe this data is now going to feed a web application, and I'm using GraphQL to do that. So all of that, it's available out of the box, no additional coding. And as you can see, all very wrapped around that logical layer. This data might be coming from the data lake, might be a derived model, might be a foundational model, might be a data product that is sponsored by a particular line of business, or who knows. All of that complexity doesn't have to be part of the day-to-day life of the end user. The end user wants to do kind of what I showed you here: browse through the data, have that e-commerce experience, that marketplace experience that we were talking about at the beginning of the session. So hopefully that gave you some idea of how to use our software and the value that it brings to the table, especially for that idea of data democratization, self-service, in the context of a data lake.
That's great, Pablo. Thank you. So just to summarize for the audience, Pablo showed the demo. It was in those 3 parts that we talked about. Looking at it from what Pablo called the technical part of the demo, the data engineer's perspective. How do you connect to your different data sources? How do you build virtual views on top of your data sources, including the data lake with the different formats of Parquet, Delta Lake, Iceberg, etc.? Then looking at the security and governance aspects of it, making it easy for you to build those and enforce those security policies within the Denodo platform. And then finally, from the end user perspective, using the data catalog as a self-service tool effectively, and all the capabilities there, including integrations with generative AI, for that natural language querying, something we're going to see a lot more of, I think, in the future. And also the data prep aspect of it, allowing you to manipulate the data very easily. Instead of, like Pablo said, dumping it out into an Excel spreadsheet, you were able to do all that within the data catalog. And basically in the background, you're building up the queries that you can then use when you want to go and run that query in a tool like Tableau or Power BI, etc. So fantastic demo, Pablo. Thank you. And now we'll go back to Doug.
Yeah, so I have a few questions that I wanted you both to stick around and field, if you don't mind. And I'm going to change our brand momentarily from Solutions Review to Solutions Preview, because I have you both here, and I want you to kind of get out your crystal balls and start looking into the future a little bit. Pablo, I'll start with you. What do you see in terms of the future of data management practices? Where are we heading, and what do you see as some of the changes that we might be able to see in the next 2 to 5 years? I mean, the world obviously is constantly changing, and you've seen a lot. But I'm curious. You have a bit of a roadmap, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think all this story of end users having more and more power, and not just end users, but line of business experts. We see that kind of that empowerment really being really important today, and that carrying over into the near future that you mentioned. And I think all of these can only work with increased governance and increased security. Also, you have regulations and all of that. So that path forward, I think, has made all those disciplines like data stewardship, data governance, that were kind of a little bit kind of looked over the shoulder in many organizations, now are kind of like coming big time, because they enable the agility, they enable that next step. So that's I think a little bit on the human side of the equation. We're going to see a lot more of that, and those are the technologies that will be able to enable that transition. On the technical side, I think we're getting to a point where the technological aspects are sort of becoming commodities, and the transition to the cloud was maybe the first iteration of that. But I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that, where the backends and what the technology is not really what you buy. It's what the vendors provide you as part of a data management solution. So I think the data lake is a very good example of that, where we've seen how data lakes have become simpler and simpler to use. Now cloud is making all the infrastructure management even simpler. And in the coming years, I think all of the complexity of the technical work of a data lake is going to become almost invisible to the vast majority of the users of data. it's becoming a commodity within the data infrastructure, and not just a data lake. As you know, there is a data lake and data warehousing are sort of like merging into the idea of lake housing and all of that. So I think we're starting to see that commodification of execution engines on data, and we are going to see a lot more of that. So just to mention a couple of areas in terms of evolution.
Yeah, Paula, what do you think? Are we going to still be building data lakes in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I like Pablo's answer, but I'm going to take a more expansive, longer term view. Because if you think back, well, it'll be about 10 years now, people are investing millions of dollars in Hadoop based data lakes. Now they're throwing that all away and they're moving to cloud based data lakes. Go back even further, 20 years, people probably invested tens of millions of dollars in data warehouses like Netezza and Teradata. Now they're throwing that all away and they're going up to Snowflake and Microsoft, etc. So in 5 or 10 years' time, there'll be something new coming along. And the question is, how many times are you allowed to throw away your previous investment versus somebody saying, no, you've got to make use of it. You built the data lake, you're going to continue using it even if there is something nicer, cooler coming along, so I'm not throwing away $10 million worth of investment. And that's one area where using this logical data architecture, having this abstraction layer, allows you to swap in new technologies, swap out old technologies, retire technologies, etc., without necessarily causing wholesale impact on the user. And that's the key, because when I transition from my Teradata or Oracle data warehouse up to Snowflake, there's a big impact on the user. If I move from Hadoop to Databricks, there's a big impact on the user. And how can you minimize that? How can you transition seamlessly, introducing new technologies, retiring old technologies without disrupting the business? That's going to be the big key as we move forward, because the only thing we know is there's going to be change, there's going to be a lot of change. But it's how we mitigate that change is going to be the key. And I think that's where I think logical architectures provide the future protection for your investments.
Well, and I think it's fascinating, in particular, the cloud story, right? I think there was a lot of cultural resistance initially about control and kind of old thinking around, the issues around security and so forth. But everybody's moved beyond that now. I think you also have this other kind of cultural shift happening within organizations where there's a younger decision-making team moving up through that are much more comfortable with new technology and much more comfortable experimenting. And so now we are in a completely new place. And layer on that, the elephant in the room that we should talk about at least briefly before we all move on, and that is generative AI, which is clearly captured the imagination of everybody in technology, and now, quite frankly, everybody outside of technology. I'm curious, again, to get your opinions. We'll start with you, Pablo, on where you see generative AI changing the landscape of data management.
Definitely, yeah. No, it's something that kind of exploded like last year, and it's definitely permeated into pretty much every aspect of technology these days. In terms of data management, I see a couple of very important areas where this is going. On one hand, I don't think it's going to fully replace the idea of a data engineer. I think the complexity working with data, it's still phenomenal, and you need person with that expertise. But I think it's Gen AI is going to be very helpful to increase the productivity of that type of work. There is a lot of repetition. There is a lot of things that can be done much faster, and that idea of like copilots or automatic AI assistants, or you pick a name, it's really taking on, and I think is going to be a very important part of any software in the near future, and in data management, no less. So that's one piece. The other piece, I think, is working towards what I call technology democratization, in the sense of there is still a lot of barriers to adopt certain software by end users. I mean, and we were talking about the data catalog as a way to smooth that barrier and make technical terms and technical metadata more palatable. But I think Gen AI, and especially the idea of natural language and being able to work with software in natural language, is going to smooth that even more. We just saw an example of like querying something using natural language, but I think the use of natural language is going to go and evolve significantly in the future, so that many things that now require expertise to use and build will kind of like go away in favor of using natural language. I think there's still a long way to go, but I think those are two critical areas where the software will embrace Gen AI.
Yeah, Paul, last words on the subject, and really last words on the event today.
Okay, so I think Pablo gave a great answer on Gen AI. I think you are going to see Gen AI infused products, like Pablo said, with the natural language queries also. Also, I think as organizations adopt generative AI, it's going to increase the demand for data. There's a branch of Gen AI now called retrieval augmented generation. In other words, using your own data to make, say, your chatbots more useful, more intelligent. And if you've got a chatbot and I want to go in query that chatbot saying, hey, has this particular check been cashed yet? It's going to have access to the bank's data. Generic data that it's been trained on is useless. It needs access to the bank's data. How do you get that data to the Gen AI model to give a sensible answer? So RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is going to be key as people move forward and take use of Gen AI. And it's just going to push the boundaries of the need for data even further. So that's my perspective on generative AI. In terms of everything we've talked about today, first of all, Doug, great talking to you. Thanks for this opportunity. I think as we talked about how people can utilize, optimize, take value from their data lakes. What Pablo showed as well. The use of a logical approach. So you don't have to push all of your data into your data lake. You can still leverage the power of that data lake, but incorporate it into your existing ecosystem, your existing data sources, without just using data pipelines. I mean, that's the way that people are going. Data fabrics, data meshes are just examples of these types of architectures. So that's the future. And as Apple said, think differently.
Well, this has been great. It's a pleasure to have two of the brightest executives at an organization present not only the solution, but present the challenges and the opportunities within a data category like this. So we very much appreciate the time. Paul, Pablo, best of luck for the rest of the year and everything that you're doing at Denodo. And we certainly will continue to cover Denodo and the space, and really can't wait to see how all of the things we were just talking about with regard to generative AI and just the future of data have an impact in our industry. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. It's been a pleasure.
Well, there you have it, another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Denodo for their participation today, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.